Westerns. They are the staple of all forms of entertainment subject matter, whether it be video games like Red Dead Redemption, TV shows like Deadwood, or movies like Young Guns, and millions more. The thing with Westerns that some people may not really think about is there was a time where people really lived that way. And they really did the things that they talk about in those movies. You know, the not super exaggerated spaghetti westerns. And today we are talking about a man and a group of outlaws who probably did more of what you see in the movies than any other outlaw in U.S. history. Bill Doolin and the Oklahombres. William M. Doolin was born in 1858, though this is contested and he may have been born at a later time. And we only have the 1858 date because that's what's read on his tombstone. He was born in Johnson County, Arkansas, to his sharecropping parents, Father Michael and his mother Artemina. In 1881, Bill Doolin, at the age of 23, headed a bit more west working odd jobs until he became a top ranch hand at HX Bar Ranch along the Cimarron River in the town that was then called Logan, Oklahoma. Doolin was well liked by the people who knew him, regarding him as trustworthy, dependable, and hardworking. The owner of the ranch, a Texan known as Oscar D. Hazel, also took a liking to Doolin, and he ended up teaching him to write and do simple arithmetic, which he applied as being an informal foreman on Hazel's ranch. Hazel, can't get the name right. Now, mind you, Oklahoma was known as Indian Territory at the time because it didn't gain its statehood until 1907. Now, during this period, whenever Bill Doolin was on the right side of the law, this is whenever he became heavily acquainted with a lot of his ranch hand friends that would later become notorious Oklahombre gang members themselves. These being George Bitter Creek Newcomb, Charlie Pierce, Tulsa Jack Blake, Bill Power, Dick Broadwell, Dan Dynamite Dick Clifton, and the later face of the gang, Bob Dalton. Now, after cowboying for a few years and living a pretty modest life, Bill began having trouble getting work, as did a lot of the cowboys and ranchers at the time. See, as the 1880s progressed, the need for cowboys slowly started decreasing in the U.S., as part due to barbed wire fencing, the increased privatization of land, and the railroads being greatly expanded, allowing a great amount of cattle to be moved via freight car. And as it became more and more difficult to get by on a honest pay, Bill and the gang started getting involved in illegal activity. See, mind you, at the time, it was illegal to sell alcohol to the natives in Oklahoma Territory, making it a very profitable business for people doing it illegally. And so, Bill and the gang looked around and realized, I have no money, but I do have alcohol. Hello, good native sir. I noticed. You have money. Why, yes, Bill, I do, but the problem is, I would like to obtain some of your alcohol. Well, my fine feathered friend, I have an idea. How about you give me some of your hard-earned money, and I give you some of my alcohol? So Bill and his gang began selling alcohol to the natives. And then it all just spirals from there. Now, this is the part that gets a little bit tricky. While it is highly likely that Bill started out small and got involved in illegal activities in the late 1880s, the exact time as to which he actually was starting to break the law is unknown. The earliest date of which we actually know that he broke the law was in 1891, when on July 4th, Bill and his gang were partying and having a good time, drinking alcohol in the Daltons' hometown of Coffeyville, Kansas. That's called foreshadowing. If you know, you know. But being that it was 1891 and Kansas was a no-fun state, alcohol was illegal in Kansas. And whenever the lawmen attempted to confiscate their beer, the Oklahombres responded by shooting at them. It's going to be a common trend with these guys, you'll come to find. Now, this resulted in 2 lawmen being wounded, leading to Bill Doolin becoming a wanted criminal and starting his outlaw career, of which he never stopped. Now, mind you, like I said, this doesn't mean that Doolin and the other Oklahombres weren't doing illegal activity prior. It's most likely that they were, but the exact dates are unknown. Now that we're getting into their illegal activities, I should preface and explain the different names of what the gang was called at the time, because there's numerous names. You know, there is the Wild Bunch, which they were called at the time, which is something that was more attributed to Butch Cassidy later, as to which I won't refer to them as that. Also, the name that I think is most fitting is the Oklahombres, but they were also known as the Doolin/Dalton gang, given that Bob Dalton and Bill Doolin were the faces of the gang, but given that there is a split later, I'm going to classify them all as the Oklahombres for now, until there's the split. Then I'll change. But around this time, in 1891, the gang noticed something. You know what? I do have a decent amount of income, but as I look at these casinos, banks, trains, and stagecoaches, I realize, wow, they have a large amount of money just sitting right there. I'd like to have some of that money. So they became professional armed robbers. Now, this is the part that y'all clicked on the video for. The banks, train, casino, store, and stagecoach robberies. And now that I'm getting to it, we're going to be here for a while. Because this gang's got a lot of members, and they did a lot of it. They were ferocious. Their first heist was on February 6th, 1891, where they robbed a gambling house in Silver City, New Mexico. I should also mention that not all of these robberies were conducted by the same members of the gang. Mind you, there at different times was like 15 different people in this organization. So the exact names are maybe unknown in the fact of some of these guys didn't get caught for these robberies. So a lot of it is speculation, but I'll try my best to give the info on the people that I know for a fact were at each one of these robberies. The reason I say this is also because on February 6th of 1891, the same day as the gambling house robbery, a train robbery occurred when masked men carrying .44 caliber revolvers robbed a Southern Pacific Railroad passenger train close to the town of Elila, California, or modern day, I don't speak whatever that word is, early art. That place in California. Which, given the statements of Lit Dalton, it's likely that his brothers Emmett and Bob committed the robbery, because they allegedly told him immediately after the robbery. You're gonna notice a lot of fuck-ups from the Emmets coming soon. Again, more foreshadowing. After their mostly unsuccessful ventures in California, Emmett and Bob Dalton decided to try their criminal efforts on their own turf in Oklahoma, forming a gang that was, at the time, would be known as the Dalton Gang, as I mentioned earlier. Now, unlike their first attempts of real-life Red Dead reenactments, their new Oklahoma robberies would be highly planned and organized. So think less, modern LA appliance store smash and grabs, and more Larry Lawton variety of crime. New place. Same video. Now, before we continue the video, you have to understand the kind of place Oklahoma was at the time, and why there was so much crime going on. Being as Oklahoma had been the state that so many native tribes had been forcibly relocated to, one of which being the Cherokee tribe that some of my own ancestors hailed from, given that Oklahoma is the state where a lot of the native tribes were forcibly relocated to, including some of my own native tribal ancestors, the Cherokee, this meant that they had to have native police officers. The problem is they could only force the law on their own native people on their own reservations, so anyone that wasn't of that tribe, they had no say or jurisdiction. As former officers themselves, the Daltons knew this rule and took advantage of it. Oklahoma, of course, still had regular sheriffs and police departments, but the problem is there was little, if any, communication going on between these officers and their departments, so this meant that you could commit a crime in one county, but then go to the other county and none of the police would know, because of things like jealousy between marshals over different jurisdictions and infighting over newly formed district courts. There was also little incentive for the police officers to go after, the major, murderous, bloodthirsty criminals. This was because the incentive for the officers at the time was the warrant plus fees. So a lot of officers went after the petty criminals, given that they wouldn't have to travel as far, they'd be right there, and they'd be a lot less likely of getting shot by the guy who stole one mule rather than the guy who robbed 5 banks, And the pay a lot of times wasn't much lower. And what this basically meant is if you did your criminal activity well enough to where you didn't earn yourself a big name, say getting like a $2,000 or $3,000 most wanted dollar on you and only getting a few hundred, you'd be okay to keep robbing and looting for a while because there'd be less incentive to get you. Which, by the way, that's like criminal 101. Do illegal shit and try not to make it known that you're doing illegal shit. So there were a lot of people that got away with all kinds of shit, as you'll see. So, as you can see, there was a lot of criminal activity in Oklahoma at the time. But with that being said, with there being a lot of criminal activity, that means that the police officers are spread very thin. And whenever police officers are spread thin, that means less people can solve crimes and catch criminals, meaning that the crime rate just continues. You know, look at any inner city in America and you'll see that exact same kind of stuff because they're so overrun with crime. But wait, there's more. Another aspect of Oklahoma, and as to why they brought in so much money, was all the cattle drives. 10 to 15 men driving 2,000 to 3,000 head of cattle on average up Oklahoma trails like the Chisholm and the Shawnee. With that being said, many cowboys who drove the cattle were also outlaws involved in serious criminal activity, like the Doolins and the Daltons. And because of the amount of money that those cattle drives made, people kind of drew a blind eye to the outlaws. It was also known to be quite dangerous to just stroll up to people who are responsible for thousands of giant animals that could stampede and run over several people. So in situations like that, yelling, running horses, and especially gunfights were really, really ill-advised. On top of that, there was a certain ill will towards the railroad companies, as people felt that they had bought up all the best land and ran through their property, and stole cattlemen's jobs like I had mentioned earlier. With that being said, there were many poor people in the West that would see newspaper articles of the trains being robbed, and they would sometimes kind of root for them, feeling like, you know what, that's justice. And there's another reason why the crime was rampant. The reason why I spent that segment explaining to you how Oklahoma was at that time is so you can later understand the reasons as to why the Oklahombres were so successful at making so much money and evading capture for so long, you know, especially given the amount of shit that they stole. Other notorious outlaws that were recruited in the gang was George Bitter Creek Newcomb and Charlie Blackfaced Bryant. Mind you, he got that nickname because he had a gunpowder burn on the left side of his cheek. He was a cowboy, not an actor. Before you're wondering. Alright, and now let's get to the heist. We're gonna be here for a while. Their first robbery was in Horton, New Perry, Oklahoma, where they robbed a train in May of 1891, where they stole $1,200, which is about $41,500 in today's money. Joining after the robbery was Bill Doolin, Dick Broadwell, Bill Powers, and Charlie Pierce. The gang was also aided by Eugenia Miss Mondays Moore, who may not have been a direct armed robber herself, but she was their informant and partook in horse theft. The gang's second train robbery occurred on September 15, 1891, at a small station called Lilietta, a few miles north of Wagner, Oklahoma. In this robbery, they came out with a score of over $19,000, which in modern value equates to a grand total of over $657,000. Many members of the gang felt like it wasn't enough money to meet their needs. That's a good sign for you right there. We stole thousands earlier. We stole well over $500,000 in today's money. We need more. And given that the money was split 6 ways, that means each one of them walked away with $121,000 in today's money, but still wanted more. It was around this time that Bill Doolin decided to quit the gang, because he had felt that Bob Dalton was unfairly distributing the money, and squandering it all on hookers and gambling. God damn it! Why are you fucking off all our bank robbing money? Tarnation. Being one of the leaders, many felt that since Bill was leaving, they should leave with him. So Bitter Creek Newcomb and Pierce left with him. But for reasons I wasn't able to find, sometime before June of 1892, the 3 dissatisfied members rejoined the gang. But I have a feeling new ground rules were laid, and Bill was seen more as a co-leader, given the disgruntles they had before leaving. On June 1st, the Daltons robbed the Santa Fe train at a small station called Red Rock, but unfortunately for them, the Santa Fe train knew that the Daltons were going to rob it, and the authorities were alerted. I'm new at this, guys. I'm new at this. And so they filled the freight car with heavily armed officers. But whenever they approached the train and saw all the lights were off in the middle of the night, they knew something was amiss, and they let the train go by without robbing it. Then a few minutes later, another train rolled up, and they robbed it. That's what you call professionals right there. That train don't look no good. We're going to rob this one that choo-chooed along because we thought we could.
I had to do one of those references in this. See, they thought they had robbed the train of $50,000, which would be a ludicrous amount of money, given that it was 1892. But whenever they looked at the money that they actually stole, once they took out the securities and drafts, it was about $1,800. Which in today's money, that's about 62,000 buckaroos. Split that 6 ways, yeah, that's not much to commit armed robbery for. Which, given that they understood this and all they wanted to do was rob more and more and more, they decided, we need to rob another train. And then we get to a part of the story where we see the final split between the Doolins and the Daltons. This being the Coffeyville debacle. And if you think I'm going to cover that monstrous story on here, you are wrong. I will do that in another video. I already have the notes written down for it. Don't worry. I don't want this video to be 3 hours long. To put simply, Bob Dalton had the bright idea to rob 2 banks in broad daylight in his hometown at the same time. Whenever he told Bill this genius tale, I will reenact how Bill felt about it. Yeah, you go do that, buckaroo. Bill Doolin decided to not take part in the robbery. Allegedly. We'll get to that. So, what entailed was what was called the Coffeyville debacle or the Coffeyville massacre. It was called this because it was the bloodiest street battle in all of Wild West history. Like, there's probably not one that could challenge that statement. Almost all the outlaws that tried to participate in the Coffeyville robbery were killed, along with several other citizens in the gunfight. It was a major ordeal. There is suspicion that Bill Doolin was there. They say he was allegedly staying behind and tending to the horses while Bob and the others in disguises went to rob the banks. Given the kind of mindset he had at the time and who he was, I highly doubt it, but some historians say that it's at least possible, so I wanted to add that in. This isn't mentioning the fact that the Daltons had never even robbed a bank before. They had robbed trains, stagecoaches, all this shit. It was their first try at like an actual bank, so you could you could see the writing on the wall there. See, and this kind of delves into the kind of outlaw that Bill Doolin was. One of the things that contributed to some of these guys turning criminal is all the dime novels that were coming out, where they were these glamorized tales of the outlaw Jesse James and Bill Hickok and stuff, and they wanted names that were that big, or at least some of them. A guy like Bob Dalton, a lot of historians think one of the driving factors as to why he tried to rob the Coffeyville banks is he wanted a bigger name than Jesse James. He wanted to rob those 2 banks and then head to Mexico with the loot, you know. Bill Doolin didn't operate like that. He was more professional. He was more on the basis of, no, I'm in it for the money, and the money, you know, or so was thought at the time. There's confliction there later on, as you'll see. So yeah, after explaining this absolutely fucking bonkers idea to Bill Doolin, Bill's like, I'm good, man. I like living. So he passed, forming his own gang. A month later, the gang that I will for the most part refer to as the Doolins was made up of George Bitter Creek Newcomb, Charlie Pierce, Tulsa Jack Blake, and the founding member, Bill Doolin, as well as a newcomer named Oliver Yantis, as they called Old Yannis. A month after the Coffeyville debacle, Doolin and his gang decided to rob a bank in Spearville, Kansas, which was in an area that they had never been before and nobody knew their faces. They were professional about it. And now that we're getting into like the real Larry Lawton kind of stuff, I'm going to delve into how they conducted these bank robberies. Like I had said previously, they would make sure to rob banks in places where they didn't draw suspicion. They would have 2 men walk into the bank acting unsuspicious, you know, looking at all the different civilians and looking at the tellers. After getting a feel for what the bank looked like and all the people there, then one man would draw his pistol down onto the banker and the robbery would begin, while the other man pointed his pistol out the crowd inside the bank to keep control. While this was going on, there would be 2 lookouts outside the bank, making sure no one came into the bank, no one left the bank, anything like that, and made sure to watch out for law enforcement the entire time. On this particular robbery, it was Oliver Yantis and Charlie Pierce standing outside. Now, this being said, you may ask me, Benvie, hey, wait a minute. So if a guy walks up to this bank and a guy points a pistol at him telling him to leave, doesn't that mean that they'll all leave and come back with guns to fight the outlaws? Indeed. Doolin had a plan for that. See, Bill Doolin was smart enough to know that the townspeople wouldn't want any unnecessary casualties, so they would take the banker as hostage. As he's leaving the bank with the other guy holding the money, he would walk out with his .44 caliber pistol pointed directly at the head of the banker, and while he saw the townspeople and marshals John Marsoning him, that's called foreshadowing, then they would take the hostage with them until they got to their horses, got on the horses, and rode ass out of town. That's whenever they let the hostage go. And of course, with this being said, the police and the townspeople, angry that they just got their loot taken, would get on their horses and proceed to chase down the outlaws. Doolin had a contingency for that too. See, there's a term in the West that was called fresh horses and used horses. This means that if you found a horse that had not been ridden for a while, it was filled with stamina. Stamina? That's hard for me to say. Stamina. There we go. Had to get that right for the video. It's been the... But if the horse was filled with stamina, it would be called a fresh horse. So, what the gang would do is they would ride into town on one set of fresh horses and use them up, and then they'd be used horses. Well, they would have horse relays, where they would have horses a few miles outside of town, tied up on fence posts and shit like that, and they'd hop on those. Since those horses were unused, they would be fresh horses, meaning that they could keep going for a long time. And while the townsfolk had used horses that couldn't run anymore, they were on relayed horses that were fresh and could keep running. So it's basically like they got into new fully gassed up cars as the townspeople ran out of gas. So everything went just as planned. They robbed the Ford County Bank in Spearville, Kansas for $4,500, or about $156,000 in today's money. After this, they got the hell out of not quite Dodge and fled to old Yanis's sister's house on November 1st. Now, it's at this time I should mention that the law was really starting to have their fill with the Oklahombres. After all the bonker stuff that Bob Dalton did, adding on to the fact of Bill Doolin running the gang now and making it even more crafty and hard to catch. As well as the fact that they kept hitting these banks one after another. As a result, many of the members ended up having a bounty of $5,000, dead or alive, placed on their heads, which equates to about $173,000 in today's money. After this, the gang decided to split up because they felt that they wouldn't have as many lawmen chasing after them if they could get a smaller bounty. After managing to elude capture from the police in Ford County near Dodge City, Kansas, Oliver Yanis headed south towards Orlando, Oklahoma to hide out at his sister's. But with officers on his trail, like the deputy marshal who was following since Ford County, along with the deputy marshals Heck Thomas and Chris Madsen, remember those names, they'll be important later, they quickly caught up to Yantis, and on November 29th, they had reached Yanis' sister's where he was hiding. They yelled asking for his surrender, where he acted as though he was going to comply by walking out, but then he quickly pulled his gun on them and opened fire. The officers responded by shooting him in the leg and stomach. It should be known that even whenever Yantis was filled with bullet holes and lead, he still had the resolve and perseverance to reload his pistol multiple times, just as sort of a, I've got plenty left in the tank, you're not going to take me alive kind of things. Though the lawmen being honorable men that they were, they quickly nursed his wounds, but the attempt was futile, just slowing his death for a short while until he died the next day. RIP. There's going to be a lot of those, by the way. After enjoying the wealth Bill Doolin had acquired, he decided to settle down just a small bit and married Edith Ellsworth sometime in March of 1893. Their next robbery was of another Santa Fe train west of Cimarron, Kansas on June 11, 1893, taking $1,000 in silver, or about $35,000 worth in today's money, from the California-New Mexico Express. Now, given that this was Doolin's favorite way of making money, I think it'd be good to explain how they robbed the trains as well, because there's going to be a lot more of those too. Given how relatively safe it was at the time, not to mention nothing could score you more money in a heist than a train robbery, so the first question you may have is, how'd they get them to stop in order to get them to board? Robbery gangs at the time would either obstruct the movement of the train via dynamiting the rails, causing them to derail, or they would put some kind of obstruction in front of the train like a bonfire while waving a red flag to signal the conductor to stop, or in the Doolin's case, most likely, just flag down the conductor with a lantern. They would then proceed to get the drop on the conductor so that the train would be entirely immobilized until the heist had been accomplished. The rest of the gang would then aim their pistols at the mail car, demanding that the messenger open up or be fired upon. If they refused, then they would open fire on the train car and smash the lock with a hammer. Then they would make sure to disarm the messenger if he was still carrying a weapon. They would then take the key from the messenger to open the safe in the car and secure the money. It should also be mentioned here that in the case of Bill Doolin, they never went out of their way to hurt anybody. Like, they didn't want to hurt the passengers. They didn't take money from them. You know, they didn't unnecessarily rough up or kill any police or the people protecting the train, like the messenger, anything like that. They knew all that would do is bring more heat on them. And in the case of Doolin, given his hardworking background, I also have a feeling it's simply just because he knew it wasn't easy for those people to make that money, and he didn't feel the need to take money from common folk. A posse of sheriff deputies from Beaver County got together and went after the Doolins, of which they finally caught up to the gang just north of Fort Supply. By the way, I live like right next to there. The gang got into a gunfight with the posse, and none of them managed to get caught or killed. But Doolin was shot in the left foot, causing him immeasurable pain that ailed him for the rest of his life. After the Fort Supply gunfight, the gang had returned to the town that at then was called the outlaw town of Ingalls. Put bluntly, historians have been quoted in saying Ingalls essentially made a deal with the devil. This statement pertains to the fact that as long as the outlaws didn't rob any of the people or businesses in the town, they had free range, which actually allowed the economy of Ingalls to flourish, because people who rob banks for a living tend to have money to spend. And given the likable and relatively peaceful nature of Bill Doolin, him and his gang were well liked and left alone to do what they did in Ingalls, so long as they minded their P's and Q's. So, everything's going well for Bill at this time. He's hanging out with his face open to the public in Ingalls, not hiding out in a cave somewhere, you know, eating well, living well, doing his thing. He's even expecting a kid soon from his wife. But on September 1st of 1893, that all changed. Yvette Dumas Nix, or Edie for short, was the newly appointed U.S. Marshal in Oklahoma Territory that had gathered a posse of 15 men to apprehend and to capture the Oklahombres in Ingalls. Or so they had hoped. Mind you, at this point, everybody in the Oklahombre gang were rolling deep. You know, they didn't just have horse theft and petty crimes like that on their records. They had shootings, bank robberies, and in some cases even murder, you know, on their records. And they knew that if any of them they got caught, best expectation, 50 years in prison. Prison. It's the S's, man. Worst case, the gallows. So they had zero intention of getting arrested. In comes the pew-pews. The gun battle began when the U.S. Marshals engaged Bitter Creek Newcomb, which quickly resulted in Newcomb going, you're not taking me. Pulling out his pistol, firing at the most 2 rounds, and instantly getting lit the fuck up. Good job, buddy. You really showed him what for. The funny thing is, he didn't die from this, right? He continued living it, but just the fact that the moment the police saw him, he was going to have like some John Marston coming out of the stables moment, you know, getting the dead eye target locks and everything, and the police are like, nah, man, you're not that guy. Beef! You're out. It's just hilarious. Now, mind you, after Newcomb gets frickin' 2-tapped, all hell broke loose. Given that a barrage of 45 caliber pistol fire isn't exactly quiet, a large number of the Doolin gang, this being Dynamite Dick Clifton, Bill Dalton, Bill Doolin, George Redbuck Waitman, Arkansas Jones, and Tulsa Jack Blake, then opened fire on the Marshals. This first exchange of bullets resulted in the shooting and killing of a horse. Who shot the horse, I'm not sure. Also, the results of the exchange led to the outmanned Doolin gang to flee out the Ransom and Murray Saloon side door, retreating to a large horse stable close by. A saloon owner whose name I could only find as Murray then allegedly tried to engage the Marshals from the front of the saloon, leading to him being shot in the ribs and arm. 2 years later, he sued the U.S. government in court, claiming he wasn't trying to fight or stop the lawmen, but was really just trying to run away. But the case was lost after E.D. Nix testified his side of the story. Very fortunately for the Oklahombres, but very unfortunately for the lawmen, Arkansas Tim's Jones stood at an elevated position, given that he was sick and laying in his bed on the second floor at a hotel with a very good angle on the Marshals, allowing him to have the advantage in the gunfight, forcing the deputy marshals to take cover. So yeah, he had like that Charles Whitman spot. He then fatally shot Deputy Marshal Thomas Houston, which, if you remember from earlier, interestingly enough, it was Houston who had killed Oliver Yantis a year prior with the Kansas sheriff. Houston also succumbed to his injuries the next day. So yeah, that's kind of poetic how that worked out. The guy who killed his friend had the favor returned to him a year later. A bystander in the battle named Dell Young Simmons was killed by a stray bullet while he was trying to flee the battle and hide in Van's saloon. Unfortunately, he was only 14. Another bystander, known as Old Man Ransom, was accidentally shot in the leg. Another townsperson named Frank Briggs was also fatally shot and killed. How Briggs was shot and killed, I couldn't find, so I don't know who shot him either. I've seen some reports of another town member being fatally killed trying to protect the Doolins, so that might be Frank Briggs, but I couldn't find any credible evidence to confirm that. Bill Doolin, being the experienced dead-eye that he was, shot and killed Special Deputy Marshal Richard Speed. Now, Richard Speed. Yo, man, are you a good shot? Yeah, I got that dick speed. It was at this point where many of the gang was about to escape to the stable on horseback when Lafayette Shadley shot the leg of Bill Dalton's horse, dumping him on his butt. Soon after, Bill Dalton shot Deputy Marshal Lafayette Shadley in return. Shadley unfortunately died the next day from his injuries as well. Dynamite Dick Clifton was also shot in the neck while riding his horse, but somehow was able to keep riding. Man, adrenaline is a heck of a fucking drug. I don't think I'd be able to get shot in the neck and just keep on buckarooing. Then, as the dust began to settle, because most of the outlaws had escaped the incident, all that was left was Arkansas Tim Jones sitting in the second floor of his hotel room sniping with his lever gun. Then, not wanting to risk more officer injury, but not really seeming to care about civilian injury, Jim Masterson decided to throw a bunch of dynamite, like a hotel-destroying level of dynamite, into the hotel to get Jones out, which Jones saw as his "yeah, I like keeping my legs, thank you" moment, and surrendered soon after the threat. When the Battle of Ingalls was over, they later counted 172 bullets in the Ransom and Murray saloon, though none of the outlaws were shot inside. Of the outlaws that made it out, Bitter Creek Newcomb was seriously injured, but still a free man. Dynamite Dick Clifton was slightly wounded, but also still a free man. Charlie Pierce was also said to have been wounded, but the severity of his wounds is unknown. But he was still breathing the outside air. And as for Bill Doolin, Tulsa Jack Blake, and Bill Dalton, they all had left unscathed. Now, if this isn't sounding like a certain Steve Miller Band song as it is, it's often said by historians that after the Battle of Ingalls, Bill and his gang were essentially running for their lives at that point. Bill Doolin was notably made America's #1 most wanted after the Battle of Ingalls. See, a lot of famous criminals by this point, if they had noticed that their gang is starting to get captured, they're all getting shot up, nowhere feels safe, they feel the law tightening in on them, that's whenever they decide, okay, I'm done. I'm going on the run. I'm going to move to Mexico, something like that. I'm going to change my identity in the case like Frank James, or move to Argentina like Butch Cassidy. Bill, nah, that's not how he rolled. He was like a lot of Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas outlaws at the time where money may have been the original reason he was in it. He was also in it for the lifestyle. He was in it for the chase. He loved pulling off amazing heists. He loved seeing his face on the paper. He wanted to get shot at and rob and steal and read about his exploits, and live life on the run. That's how he was going to live. There was no stopping him. There was no stopping him unless he was able to be successfully caught and put in prison forever or he was killed. After the Battle of Ingalls, Bill quickly continued business as usual, more bank and train robberies. After a short break to regroup and recover from the injuries sustained in the Ingalls battle, the group continued their activities with their next robbery being on January 3rd, 1894, where Charlie Pierce and Redbuck Waitman robbed a store and post office in Clarkson, Oklahoma, stealing cash, tobacco, registered mail, and supplies. How much cash they stole or the value of the other stuff they stole, I couldn't find. Then, a few weeks later, on January 23rd, the gang robbed the Farmers Citizens Bank in Pawnee, Oklahoma. But I'm sure they were pretty unhappy with the robbery given the bank only had $262 to give them, or about $9,600 in today's money. Yeah, think about splitting that like 6 ways. After 2 semi-botched robberies, the gang looked around realizing, hey, we're bank robbers. Why aren't we making bank robbery kind of money? Let's go knock over a train because we always tend to do well with those. So on March 10th, 1894, they robbed a train. The Doolin gang robbed the Santa Fe Train Company in Woodward, Oklahoma. My hometown. That's no shit. That railroad is still there back when we were just Main Street. You can literally walk to where they robbed it in the 1890s. Pretty cool. It's one thing reading about history and even seeing these events happening in Oklahoma. It's another thing knowing it's like, yeah, the stuff where this took place, it's literally like walking distance from my house. Pretty cool. Luckily for the Oklahombres, the gang's luck finally turned for the better again when they acquired over $6,000 from the Santa Fe, or over $220,000 in today's money. Another important aspect of this robbery is it was the highest score they had ever successfully gotten away with by a large degree. On April 1st, 1894, Bitter Creek Newcomb and Bill Doolin decided to hold up a store owned by a retired U.S. Deputy Marshal named W.H. Carr in Sacred Heart, Oklahoma. Being the sharp-witted fast draw that he was, the moment W.H. saw Bill Dalton, he pulled out his pistol. At which point, Bitter Creek Newcomb pulled out his gun, and like something straight out of Hollywood, he shot Carr in the hand. Yeah, that's like some shit you'd see in Magnificent Seven. But even still, Carr managed to shoot Newcomb in the shoulder. Dalton then managed to shoot Carr in the abdomen, at which point they thought, we ought to get while the getting's good. But Carr chased them out of the store while shooting at them. They only managed to get away because they got on their horses and rode off. The robberies not going smoothly for the Oklahombres continued when, on May 10th, 1894, they decided to rob a bank in southwest Missouri, where, in a not-so-standard way for the Oklahombres to operate, they had tied down their horses next to local post offices before they dismounted from their horses, then yelling, and I quote, "Hunt holes," preceded by them firing their Winchesters into the air. Yeah, not exactly the stealthiest way of doing it, guys. Then Bill Doolin and two other men began walking up Main Street to the AF Alt Bank, while the other four men remained as lookouts by the horses and in a pool hall. Now, it's at this time I think it's important to address the differences between the Oklahombres in 1892 versus the Oklahombres in 1894. See, by this point, they had made it away with a few successful robberies. A lot of them escaped completely unscathed from the Battle of Ingalls, you know. One of them, being Bill Doolin, may have possibly escaped from the biggest Wild West massacre in U.S. history. So at this point, I think Bill especially was feeling like, well, we're untouchable. They shot at us 172 times and didn't hit us once, you know. And this led to them getting sloppy. So it starts to make sense why you start seeing cases of them robbing stores owned by lawmen while being some of the most wanted men in the nation. Or while they thought it would be a good idea to waltz into a town knowing that they were the most wanted men in the nation and firing their guns in the air thinking, nah, it'll be alright. That kind of sounds familiar. After securing $3,700 in cash, but not the $5,000 in bonds, it gave the townspeople plenty of time to figure out what was going on and secure arms. With the townspeople beginning to shoot back at the outlaws, 2 people were injured in accidental crossfire. Interestingly enough, one of them was a former senator known as J.C. Seaborn, the other accidental victim being his brother. Another townsfolk got shot in the leg and damn near had his leg amputated. Once they got close to the horses, letting the bankers go, the robbers then shot in every direction, then mounted their horses, then rode off. But as they got on their horses to ride away, they encountered many of angry townsfolk, as well as marshals and deputies who began shooting at the Doolins. While riding away, at least 2 of the Doolins got shot along with one of their horses. Bill Doolin was actually shot himself, and he was shot in the head with buckshot, but still managed to keep on riding. How the fuck does that happen? I've shot buckshot. I've seen what buckshot can do. Dude, people were just built different back then. That's all it's gonna be. One of the marshals was also shot in the battle, but luckily it was just a flesh wound in his leg. Then, as they rode by the local Baptist church, another one of the gang's horses was shot. At which point, they had noticed, hey, we are not going to make it on our noble steeds. They then ran into a couple outside the town that had horses the gang wanted. Unfortunately for Doolin, his favorite horse, Old Dick, was wounded. But luckily not in bad enough shape to leave behind. He managed to ride out the battle with Old Dick, but sadly decided to sell his horse to a doctor in Ingalls, because he wasn't a viable saddle horse anymore. So, with everything said and done, the Doolins made it out of Southwest City. Filled with bullet holes, but breathing the air. As well as securing what would be over $135,000 today. After some investigation, it was guesstimated that around 100 rounds were fired in the battle in Main Street alone. And from what I was able to find, unfortunately, J.C. Seaborn had died of his injuries 4 days later, with Little Dick West being the most likely fatal shooter. For reasons I couldn't find, Bill Dalton, the co-leader of the Doolin gang, decided to leave the group to start a new gang, where on May 23, 1894, he and his gang robbed the First National Bank in Longview for $2,000. Where a couple weeks later, a posse of lawmen approached the Daltons' home in Ardmore, where Bill, for whatever reason, decided to jump out a window and run towards the officers. When, after being told to halt, the still continuing Dalton was shot and killed instantly. Yeah, not the brightest guy of the bunch. Then on December 19th, 1894, the Doolins attempted to rob the J.R. Pierce store in Texana, Oklahoma, where they only made it out with $20 before being driven off. They probably realized that there wasn't near enough loot there to get fucking killed over, so they left. And the rut rows didn't end there. The Oklahombres, without Bill Doolin, decided to rob the Rock Island train in Dover, Oklahoma. They had the opportunity of making a huge score of over $50,000 there, which was going to be used to pay members of the U.S. military, which adjusted for inflation would be around $1 million today. Which, mind you, if successfully stolen, this would be the highest paying robbery in all of Wild West history. But unfortunately for the Oklahombres, they couldn't manage to get the safe open. So unbeknownst to them, they missed out on what would have been a massive score. Not like $5,000 that they were used to getting, which was still a ton of money. So, once they gave up on the Black Hills Gang level loot, some of you may know the reference, they decided to rob the passengers. Mind you, Bill Doolin was not there. I think that's the reason why the passenger robbing occurred. It's important here that I mention E.D. Nix's three guardsmen. E.D. Nix was the marshal of Oklahoma, and he had jurisdiction over 70,000 square miles of territory in the state. And he had gotten to the point where he had figured that the level of law enforcement pressure that was on the Doolins wasn't enough in order to get them, so he had formed what was known as the Three Guardsmen, which was Heck Thomas, Bill Tillman, and Chris Madsen, all three of which were legendary lawmen and successful in gunfights. The perfect candidates to take down the Doolins. Then, after being skillfully followed by the Three Guardsmen member Chris Madsen since daybreak, Madsen and his posse had managed to sneak up on the gang that had set up camp in what they had thought was a safe place in the middle of nowhere. Taking a break in the sand basin along the Cimarron River in Major County, Oklahoma, the outlaws were called out by Banks and his men. In response, Tulsa Jack began firing in their direction, and a fierce gun battle ensued. As bullets flew for almost 45 minutes, the gang held the marshals off. However, when Blake broke cover to flee, he was shot and killed. As the firing continued, 2 more bandits were wounded before the rest of the men escaped. Deputy William Banks later estimated that around 200 rounds were fired in the battle. And this is the point where the jig is pretty much up. You know, there's not really any more brazen robberies done by Doolin and his boys because there's really not much left of a gang to speak of. Most of them had either been thrown in prison or killed by this point, you know, so if they weren't running for their lives already, they sure as hell were now. On May 1st, 1895, Bitter Creek Newcomb and Charlie Pierce were killed by some bounty hunters known as the Sun Brothers. Interestingly enough, these brothers were actually the siblings of Bitter Creek's girlfriend, and it's alleged that Bitter Creek's girl betrayed him, but it's said to be more likely that the brothers just followed where their sister was going and staying, and knew at some point she would end up at Newcomb's hideout for the brothers to see. Dude, if it was the first one, that's one hell of a betrayal. So as Newcomb and Pierce rode into Pawnee and got to Rose Dunn's house, they dismounted their horses and were instantly shot and killed by the brothers who were waiting for them. Interestingly enough, it was years later that people started putting flowers on Pierce's graves during the anniversary of his shooting, and hog guts on the anniversary of the guy who shot him's death. Guy had some interesting family. Being literally America's Most Wanted and faces known by every Mutt, Bill, and Jeff in Oklahoma, in the summer of 1895, Little Dick West and Bill Doolin fled to New Mexico. Given that Bill was a bit older now, and he had a wife and kid that he cared about, I think this is whenever his blood began to cool a bit, and he was thinking about, like, actually wanting to ride into the sunset, but at this point I think you already know what the end result for him is. But knowing that his options were very limited, Doolin made several offers to surrender in favor of a lighter sentence. But all his offers were rejected given his actions led to the death of a 14-year-old, he was a known cop killer, and the dude stole a One-Eyed Willie's level of loot. Yeah, nah, it was too late for Bill. He was either going to spend his last days on the chain gang or the gallows. While Bill Doolin was hiding out near Bergen, Kansas on September 6, 1895, Oklahombres Little Bill Radler was tracked down by Guardsman member Bill Tillman and 2 other officers. When Little Bill came to face with the lawmen, he started shooting at them with his rifle. He quickly got hit by a rifle bullet in the wrist and dropped his gun. Again, that's like some real-life fucking Young Guns shit. He then began to try to run away, when he then got shot in the back of the neck. Surprisingly enough, though, he didn't die from his wounds and stood on trial for his part in the Dover robbery, and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, where he was released in 1903, in ill health due to his bullet injuries, which he died of the next year. I mean, given that he rode with Doolin, the dude's lucky he made it out alive at all, nonetheless, made it out of prison. Sometime before January of 1896, Bill Doolin and his wife traveled to Eureka Springs, Arkansas, in hopes that the medical waters would help soothe or cure his rheumatism. Mind you, he still had that leg injury that he got a few years prior. Shut the fuck up. Unfortunately for Doolin, though, Bill Tillman tracked Doolin down on January 15th of 1896, of which he saw Bill almost as soon as he walked into the resort. Bill, being caught by surprise, was quickly drawn upon by Tillman and arrested. Bill, thinking of his wife and kid, he felt that if he tried anything, he would get killed or badly injured, so he chose to peacefully allow Tillman to arrest him, as long as Tillman didn't put handcuffs on him. Doolin was then taken back to jail in Guthrie, Oklahoma, to await trial. While Doolin was in jail, another Oklahombre, Redbuck Waitman, was gunned down by Arapahoe, Oklahoma territory by a Custer County posse. On the morning of March 4th, Deputy Marshal Joe Menchner shot and killed Redbuck after Redbuck chose a firefight rather than being arrested. Well, after stating that Bill would plead guilty in order to avoid the death penalty, Doolin had no intention of seeing trial. He was going to break out. And on July 5th, 1896, Bill Doolin, Dynamite Dick Clifton, and 12 other inmates escaped the jail in Guthrie. On Sunday night, July 5th, 1896, he engineered his escape. 4 prisoners overpowered and disarmed the jail's night guard. The other guard was in the bullpen of the jail, and upon realizing what was happening, tried to run out of the unsecured area. Doolin beat him to the door, closing and locking it, which left the guard helpless and unarmed among the prisoners. Doolin then grabbed a revolver and ordered the night guard to open the combination locks, putting the gun to his chest and ordering him to open the locks or die. The guard, knowing who Bill was, complied. Yeah, I wouldn't take my chances with that dude. The guard then set 9 other prisoners free. 2 of those prisoners took the big front door key from one of the guards, went back to the bullpen, and invited the 35 prisoners still there to go with them. When all refused, they locked one guard in the bullpen and the others in a cell. The gang then took a half-dozen coats, vests, and hats belonging to the jailers and guards, as well as took any available weapons. Then they ran out of the jail. As the other escapees scattered, Bill Doolin headed out to Lawson, Oklahoma to stay with his in-laws while the heat could die down. Funnily enough, a few months later, Doolin must have felt he didn't need the jailer's pistol anymore, and that it were wrong for him to keep it. So he had his mother-in-law drop it off at a hardware store in Perry, Oklahoma, with a note for the jailer thanking him for the pistol. Dude, people had a different form of kindness back then. Like, this guy was a robber and a murderer. But once he didn't need the guy's pistol anymore, he's like, hey man, I'll give you your iron back. Here you go. I don't need it. Thanks, dude. Well, he also may have done that to get more media attention, like some outlaws did at the time, but knowing Doolin's style, I'm not too sure that was really the case. Guardsman Heck Thomas found out about the jailer's pistol story in the state newspaper, and began to gather a posse to go around Lawton, given that that is where Doolin's wife's family lived. One of her family members showed that she had been in recent contact with Doolin, so this probably meant Doolin was there. Now, given how close Lawson was to Ingalls, and given how the townsfolk of Ingalls were, they had a very boondocks way of handling the investigators looking for Doolin.
Hey, I ain't seen nothing.
Hell no!
Man, fuck your mama.
I missed that show. It would get canceled instantly today. The police instead had to commission the help of the Dunn brothers. Remember them? The Dunn brothers' ranch was located very close to where Doolin was hiding and had been a known hideout for the Doolins. So while Heck Thomas was keeping tabs on Doolin's mother-in-law's family, one of his informants, most likely a man known as Tom Noble, and another man who would get some of the share of the Doolin reward money, had telegrammed Heck that Doolin and 4 others were in Lawson. Now, these 4 others were not mentioned, but most likely included gang members Dynamite Dick Clifton and Little Dick West, and that Doolin had been also preparing to leave the country with his wife and kid. So, basically, if the law, wanted any chance of catching Doolin in that century, it was now or never. So, the posse was assembled, this being Heck, his son Albert, Marshall, Rufus, B, Doll, George, and John Dunn, and possibly High Cotts, another Dunn family member, along with the 2 Noble brothers, Tom and Charlie. So, on August 24th, 1896, the posse took to their positions east of the Eagle Creek Bridge in close proximity of the Doolin's hideout, basically trapping Doolin inside without him knowing. Being the very sharp outlaw that Heck was, he knew that if things were done wrong, it could be another Battle of Ingalls situation and a bunch of people could get killed. So he pulled all the stops. So they didn't make their presence known to Doolin or his family, simply waiting out in the cover of darkness for Bill or any of the other outlaws to show up. The other thing that's important to note is Heck was fully aware that Bill Doolin had zero intentions of being arrested again, so he knew that in order to conduct this operation successfully, he would have to shoot Doolin. And at this point, I think the person that would best explain what happened next is Heck Thomas himself in a letter to Bill Tillman. This letter dating September 3rd, 1896. We waited a long time without seeing anyone, although there was considerable stir about the store and dugout. Finally, Doolin came out of the stable and to our great surprise started down the lane coming west. You know how the store is situated on the high prairie. If Bill had wanted to have made his escape, he could have escaped open roads north, south, east, northeast, or northwest through the pasture to those high hills that you have seen many times. Well, he came right down the lane, leading his horse by the tip ends of the bridle reins, walking slow in the bright moonlight, Winchester in both hands, well out in front of him, nearly in position to shoot. He sure was on the prowl, looking first to one side and then the other. Then I hollered to him, and had one of the other boys on the other side of the road also holler to him. He shot at me, and the bullet passed between me and B. Dunn. I had let one of the boys have my Winchester and had an old No. 8 shotgun. It was too long in the breech, and I couldn't handle it quick, so he got another shot with his Winchester, and as he dropped his Winchester from glancing shot, he jerked his pistol, and some of the boys thought he had shot once and the other twice. And about that time, I got the shotgun to work, and the fight was over. End quote. Yeah, Bill basically had like a real-life John Marston exiting the stables moment. Like, he got the dead, he really did, not like Nukem, he got the dead eye lock, he's ready to go, and boom, boom, boom! So that, as they say, was that. Bill Doolin on August 24th, 1896, at the age of 38, was no more. His death most likely being the result of a fatal shotgun blast by Heck Thomas in the firefight. Allegedly, there are also claims that B. Dunn killed Doolin and not Heck, and also that he may have never been fatally shot at all and instead died of illness, which led to the theory of them taking his body and filling it with bullet holes then collecting the bounty. And I'm not saying that the I shot Doolin, not you thing is a stretch, but it seems like one of those things where the guy was just trying to take the glory, you know. I think Heck did kill him. And as for the other rumors of them, like, filling the body with bullet holes after he died, that just doesn't seem like something Heck Thomas would do. None of the Guardsmen members, though, they were very honorable men, you know. Now, if it was the Dunn brothers and they claimed that, then I'd believe it, if it was just them alone. Being that it was the 1800s and people didn't really do subtle back then, Bill's body was immediately put on display in Guthrie for the whole world to see and photograph. His photo is iconic for the fact that they made sure to remove his shirt to show the 21 bullet holes that riddled his chest, not to mention keeping his eyes open for some reason. He was later buried at the Boot Hill Cemetery in Guthrie, with his wife quickly filing a wrongful death suit, wanting $50,000 in damages. But the case was dismissed in 1897 because there wasn't even anything remotely wrongful about Doolin's death. More than a year later, Dynamite Dick Clifton was tracked down by Deputy U.S. Marshals and was killed near Checkaw. I feel so terrible. It's a native name, and I'm from Oklahoma. I can't... Checkaw, I don't know. Checkaw, Oklahoma. He got killed there. On November 7th, 1897. Little Dick West, one of the last remaining fugitive gang members, was also killed on April 8th of 1898 by Deputy U.S. Marshals in Logan County, Oklahoma. Now, I could have spent a while there going into how they died, but given that Bill's story is over, and this video is already, like, super long, I don't really see a reason to go into that. You know, the summary is they got shot and killed. And there you have it, the story of Bill Doolin and the Oklahombres. And, holy shit, I could have talked about so much more. Like, so much more. That's what's so fascinating about the gang is, not only did they operate, like, literally exactly where I live, you know, and they operated all over my state. They just robbed everything that wasn't nailed down, and it went on for years, and they wouldn't stop. They had no plans of riding off in the sunset, and, you know, change their name, moving to Mexico, anything like that. No, they were gonna rob, steal, cheat, loot, the whole shebang up until the end. They were all like Trevor from GTA. They had no intention to stop. And the other thing about it that I find cool, and this is probably the most interesting thing to me, is the shit you see in the movies. Like I said earlier. That's really how they ran. They really, they really did the, you know, battle at OK Corral kind of shit all the time. You know, they left towns after getting into major gunfights. They robbed incredible amounts of loot. You know, they had last stand moments like some shit you'd see in Red Dead. You know, they did it all. You know. And what's funny to me is it wasn't a case like a lot of other outlaws at the time. Like for Jesse James, it was a thing of partially like a Southern rebellion thing and them not being used to not being part of the raids after the war. Or a thing really where it even started like they wanted the fame from it and the notoriety. And they wanted to live that lifestyle. No, it started just because it was a bunch of guys who had trouble getting fucking work. And then they're just like, fuck it, let's take the money and run. I've mentioned the Steve Miller Band, you know, Billy and Bobby Sue cutting loose moment several times, but yeah, they just decided to cut loose, and next thing you know, $6 million in today's money was stolen. Pretty fucking wild. I'll get into the Coffeyville massacre in a later video. I just want to say, sorry it took me so long to make this video, so long. I've had a lot of stuff going on, you know, and that's not going to be an issue now. And I know I know a lot of people, they aren't fond of the AI art. Don't worry, I intend to make improvements on that and maybe try to get a legitimate artist to do that, or I may just make the artwork for that myself. And yeah, now that my schedule's more normal and I'm not having as many migraines, and I had to get over a terrible sinus infection. Now that I'm doing better physically, I should be able to come out with videos more often, and I'm going to try to come out with one once per week, and I think that's a goal I really can hit. So yeah, if y'all can, if you could like and subscribe to my channel, that would be dope, and subscribe to my music channel as well. I am getting a band together. You know, we're not in our infancy anymore. We've really got something established, and we'll be coming out soon with a name and all that, and maybe performing live not too long from now, you know, so that would be dope. Stay tuned for that, and yeah, check out my music on SoundCloud, Spotify, all that, and I'll catch y'all later. Have a good one.